Look at this, Chad laughed, some old guy walking around with a fake medal like he's Captain America or something. Could this mockery hide a hero's truth? He clipped the purple heart onto his own shirt, started live streaming it like a joke, mocked it, wore it like a toy, and laughed again. He didn't know the man in front of him had earned that medal under fire. Dragging brothers through the mud at Key San, didn't know who was watching, didn't expect silence to speak louder than any uniform, but that's what happened next, and none of us ever forgot it. Welcome to Graceful Valor Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. The buzz of fluorescent lights hummed above the rows of sneakers and shoeboxes at the Foot Locker in Pinebrook, Pennsylvania. It was just past noon on a Saturday, the kind of day when weekend traffic poured in like clockwork. Teenagers drifted in from the nearby food court, lured by the loud music and the chance to try on shoes they couldn't afford. Parents waited in line, eyeing back-to-school sales, and over by the register, Chad Delaney leaned against the counter, scrolling his phone with the intensity of someone trying to ignore the world around him. Kyle Brooks stood in the back hallway, sorting boxes that hadn't made it to the stockroom yet. He'd been working at this mall for over a year. Not glamorous, not terrible, mostly quiet. Kyle liked quiet. He glanced toward the front. Chad hadn't looked up in 10 minutes. Kyle shook his head and kept unpacking. That's when he saw him, the old man. He walked slowly, not in a way that begged for attention, just steady, worn brown jacket, slacks neatly pressed, a black ball cap embroidered with the words U.S. Marine Corps Veteran, and pinned to the lapel of his coat, slightly off-center, was a medal, purple, heart-shaped, recognizable to anyone who'd ever served or taken the time to care. Kyle knew what it was. His grandfather had one tucked in his shadow box in the living room. He'd never taken it out. He never had to. Kyle watched as the man browsed quietly, occasionally leaning forward to test the sole of a walking shoe or check the size tag. There was a calmness to him, not slow, not confused, just deliberate, like a man who had no reason to rush anymore. He eventually settled on a modest pair of New Balance walkers, black, size 11. He tucked the box under his arm and made his way to the checkout line. Kyle put down the box cutter and drifted a little closer, staying by the corner of the display racks. Something in him felt alert. He couldn't explain why, just that something didn't feel right up front. Chad Delaney looked up from his phone for the first time in a while. The customer stepped forward. The line behind him had thinned. That it for you today? Chad asked, his tone automatic, already reaching for the scanner. The old man nodded. Yes, sir, just the one. Chad beeped the box, $74.95. The man reached into his jacket for a worn leather wallet. He moved slowly, but not with any kind of struggle, just age. That's when Chad noticed the medal. What's that thing on your jacket? He asked, eyebrows raising, voice laced with a careless amusement. The old man paused, hands still inside his coat. It's a Purple Heart. Chad laughed under his breath. Really? The old man said nothing. Kyle took a small step forward, enough to stay within earshot, but out of sight. Chad kept going. I mean, no offense, but people wear all kinds of stuff these days. TikTok's full of guys pretending to be SEALs just for likes. Looks like something you'd buy on Etsy. Still, the old man didn't speak. He just placed two folded 20s on the counter, eyes steady. Chad shook his head, grinning. I've seen videos like this before. Some old guy shows up, wears a fake medal, and thinks everyone should bow or something. It's always the same vibe. The old man's jaw tightened just slightly. I earned this in 1968, Key San. Chad blinked. That's Vietnam, right? The man nodded. Chad scoffed. Yeah, okay, sorry, I'm sir, but that was like 100 years ago. I wasn't even born when Nirvana was a band. Kyle clenched his jaw. The transaction should have ended there, but Chad wasn't done. Honestly, he said, gesturing toward the medal, that kind of stuff, wearing it out in public, it's a little, I don't know, feels like attention seeking. I mean, if you were really in combat, wouldn't you be like quiet about it? That's when it happened. Chad reached across the counter, two fingers extended, and in one careless, disrespectful motion, he plucked the Purple Heart off the old man's jacket. The pin tore slightly through the worn fabric. The metal dropped into Chad's palm. Kyle froze. The old man didn't react, didn't shout, didn't raise his hand. He just looked at Chad, a long, steady look that made Kyle's stomach twist. But Chad, still caught up in his own oblivious performance, laughed. He clipped the medal onto his own name tag right over his Foot Locker polo. Going live, he mumbled to himself. He pulled out his phone with one hand and tapped open a live stream. Kyle could hear it. Hey fam, Chad said to the camera, grinning. Look what I got today. Some guy came in here cosplaying as Rambo, rocking this ancient medal like it's Comic-Con. What do you think? Should I salute myself? He chuckled. A few emojis and laughing reactions flooded the stream. People turned to look. First one, then two, then five. It wasn't loud, it wasn't chaotic, it was something worse. And mockery wrapped in silence. Could this disrespect turn into a lesson? And then footsteps, measured, approaching from the far aisle. A man in a navy blazer and khakis appeared, moving quickly but with control. Short cropped hair, calm face, purposeful walk. Kyle recognized him. Harold Strickland, regional director, and 10 years A U.S. Army captain, he was mid-store visit. Kyle had seen him taking notes near the front earlier. Harold stopped at the edge of the counter, his eyes swept over the scene, the old man silent, jacket torn slightly, Chad smiling at a live stream, wearing a medal that was never his, and the phone still pointed at his own face and the stream. Harold said, calm, firm, the kind of tone that doesn't need to be loud to demand obedience. Chad blinked. Sir, I was just. Harold cut him off with a look, just a glance, nothing more. Chad fumbled with the phone and tapped it off. Harold stepped forward. He turned to the old man first, his voice dropped. Quieter now. Sir, may I? The old man nodded once. Harold reached up, unclipped the medal from Chad's shirt, and held it in both hands like something sacred. He examined it briefly, then returned it to its rightful owner with both hands, and with a small respectful nod, the old man took it gently, refastened it to his lapel. Still no words. Harold turned to Chad. That medal, he said, is not a joke. Chad stammered. I didn't know it was real. You thought wrong. Kyle had never heard Harold raise his voice. He didn't need to. Purple Hearts are earned, Harold said, by bleeding in service to this country, by standing when others fall, by dragging your brothers through mortar fire because you said you would. The silence that fell was heavy, unshakable. Harold stepped back. Kyle, still half behind the shelves, felt his throat tighten, and Chad, he just stood there frozen, still holding the receipt. For the first time all shift, he had nothing to say. Could this silence reshape their respect? And for the first time all year, the store truly fell silent. Chad Delaney had always loved an audience, even if it was just a few followers online or a crowd of strangers scrolling half awake on their phones. It didn't matter. Views were views, likes were validation. Every ping of a notification was another reminder that someone somewhere was watching him, even if just for a second. So when the old man in the faded Marine Corps cap walked up with that medal on his chest, Chad saw content, not a person. It wasn't malice exactly, just ignorance dressed in confidence, the kind that came from growing up in a world where wars were stories, not memories, where soldiers were movie characters, not neighbors, where hardship was something you edited into a 10-second clip with a trending audio track and a punchline. And right now, Chad thought he had the punchline in front of him. That thing real, he said, already half laughing, eyes flicking back and forth between the Purple Heart and the old man's steady face. The veteran didn't flinch, just stood there, quiet. Still, I earned it in 1968, Kisan, he said, voice even. Chad tilted his head. That's Vietnam, man, that was like 100 years ago. He turned toward his phone, thumb swiping with ease. Bet I can find 3 on eBay for $20. Kyle Brooks, still by the end cap display, just out of direct line of sight, felt something twist in his stomach. He wasn't a veteran, but his grandfather was, and something about the way that medals sat on the man's coat, it didn't look like cosplay, it looked like gravity. Chad, meanwhile, was ramping up. This is wild, he muttered to his phone, flipping it to front camera mode. I'm at work and this dude just rolled up with some kind of pin like he's in a parade. Like, no disrespect, but this ain't Arlington, bro. Then when without asking, without hesitation, he reached out and unclipped the medal from the man's lapel. The pin tore slightly as it came free. The old man's jacket sagged just a little where it had been. Kyle took a step forward instinctively, but stopped. He wasn't a manager, he wasn't in charge, but still, everything about this felt wrong. Chad didn't notice, he was too busy showing off. Check it out, he grinned, pinning the Purple Heart onto his own chest, crooked and over his lanyard. Drip check. I'm official now. Can someone cue the national anthem? He posed, he pouted, he raised 2 fingers in a salute, but backwards, sloppy, mocking old man fashion 2025. If you want the look, hit me up. All you need is a vintage jacket, a war story, and zero shame. He laughed at his own joke. Kyle stopped moving, so did the couple browsing the shoe wall. The teenage girl near the exit paused, one eyebrow raised. Even the little boy tugging at his mother's sleeve fell still. The only person not reacting was James Monroe. He just stood there, back straight, eyes steady, veins in his hands just slightly more visible now as he clenched his fingers slowly, then released. He didn't shout, he didn't move to take the medal back, he didn't say a word, and in that silence, something began to shift. Chad hadn't noticed it yet. He was still talking into the phone, the stream picking up more viewers, more comments. Some were laughing, others were telling him to stop, a few were just typing one word, disrespect. Then the store's energy changed. It didn't start with shouting. It started with the silence growing heavy. Someone cleared their throat, another customer walked slowly backward, distancing themselves from the register, and then came the click of dress shoes, measured, intentional. A man stepped forward from the entrance, sleeves rolled up over his forearms, an ID badge clipped to his belt. Kyle knew the face before the name. Everyone did. Harold Strickland, regional director, former Army captain. He was in the store that day for a routine, unannounced walkthrough. Compliance, cleanliness, staff evaluations. He hadn't expected to find a Medal of Honor being worn like a joke in front of his register. He didn't speak at first, just watched. Chad finally looked up from his screen, annoyed by the shift in the room. and then he saw Harold, the color drained from his face. Mr. Strickland, I was just. Harold raised one hand, not a threat, just enough. He stepped forward and stood beside the old man, who was still motionless. Then he looked at Chad, not with rage, but something colder, disappointment. He held out his hand, palm up. Chad hesitated, then reached for the medal and unclipped it from his own chest. Harold took it gently, holding it like it might crack if he gripped too hard. He turned to Mr. Monroe. His voice was quiet, but it carried a sir, he said. If I may. The old man nodded once. Harold bowed his head just slightly and returned the medal to its rightful place. The pin clicked softly through the torn fabric. Kyle noticed Harold's hands were almost reverent in how they moved. Then Harold took one step back and faced Chad. That, he said, pointing to the Purple Heart, is not a costume, that is not a punchline, that is blood, that is pain, that is loss you cannot imagine, that is sacrifice most men would never survive. Chad didn't say anything, couldn't. Harold's voice stayed calm, but no one in that store misunderstood the weight of it. You don't touch it, you don't joke about it, you don't put it on like it's a name tag at a conference, you see that medal, you do one thing, you stand still. The room held its breath. Chad's mouth opened, then closed. There was nothing to say, no excuse, no script, no camera to shield behind, just a man in a polo shirt and the silence of being seen. Harold looked around at the customers, no one moved. Then he turned to the man beside him. Sir, he said again, softer this time, thank you for your service. The old man gave a small nod, no pride, no speech, just dignity. Harold looked down once more, then turned to Chad. We'll talk. In the back, Chad followed, no longer walking, shuffling. The stream had long since ended, but the moment it remained, Kyle stepped out from the side aisle. He watched Mr. Monroe gently touch the medal again, his fingers brushing it, not like someone reattaching an accessory, but like someone checking that a scar was still closed. Then he walked out, no fanfare, no statement, just the steady steps of a man who had survived more than any of them would ever understand could. This quiet exit leave a lasting impact, and the story didn't go back to normal, not really. Some moments echo louder after the noise stops, and this one would echo for a long time. It wasn't supposed to reach him. Harold Strickland had walked into the Pinebrook Foot Locker that day, expecting a routine inspection, cleanliness, staff rotation, maybe a quiet note to the district manager about inventory flow. He was halfway through a checklist on his tablet, noting a crooked promotional sign by the entrance when the vibration in his back pocket buzzed twice, a double ping. That was the alert protocol. He glanced at the notification, flag stream incident escalation, Tier 1. Location Pinebrook Register 2. He tapped the link. The live video was already clipped and archived, just 26 seconds, no sound, just a frozen image of a young employee laughing into a phone camera, a military medal pin lopsided across his chest. In the foreground, an elderly man in a brown jacket stood still, one hand hanging by his side, the other half clenched at the wrist. Harold didn't need the audio, he'd seen enough. He handed the tablet to his assistant without a word and crossed the store with a kind of calm that wasn't rushed but unmistakably firm. His footsteps were clean, purposeful, they cut through the chatter and the music and the retail din like a slow-moving stormfront. Customers parted as he approached, and there, just as the video had shown, stood Chad Delaney, phone still in one hand, grin still painted across his face, a Purple Heart medal clipped casually over his name badge like a novelty pin from a tourist shop. The air shifted when Harold arrived. He didn't raise his voice, didn't throw his authority around, didn't need to. He simply said, "End the stream." Chad looked up startled. Sir, Mr. Strickland, I was just now. There was no debate. Chad fumbled, tapped the screen, and the light disappeared. The store music kept playing, a soft pop song thumping from the overhead speakers. But no one was listening. Everything else had slowed. All eyes turned to them. Harold stepped forward. His gaze drifted from Chad's fumbling hands to the medal on his chest. It had slipped sideways in the past few seconds, caught on a thread of the lanyard. He reached for it, not with force, not with anger, but with the kind of care usually reserved for something you don't believe you're worthy to touch. He unpinned the Purple Heart and held it in both palms. Then he turned. For the first time, he faced the man beside the counter, the man whose chest had been left bare, whose jacket now hung slightly torn, fabric frayed where the medal had been yanked from its resting place. The old man hadn't moved. He stood upright as if rooted to the floor, no expression of rage, no quiver of indignation, just presence, solid, quiet, unshakable. Harold took one step closer, then another, and finally in front of the entire store. He lowered his head. Not much, just enough, sir, he said softly. If I'm not mistaken, that's a real medal. The old man looked at him, eyes calm. Yes, Purple Heart. The answer was simple. Kisan, 1968. Harold felt it in his gut. He had read about that battle in training, had studied the maps, seen the photographs, the names of the hills, the letters home, the casualty lists. He looked back down at the medal in his hands. His voice grew quieter. I've only ever seen one of these up close once, when they gave it to my squad leader. He bled out on a medevac chopper. 2 minutes later, he paused. Then, with both hands, he offered the medal back, not like a transaction, but like returning something sacred. The old man, James Monroe, took it gently. He didn't say thank you. He Didn't need to. He reattached it to his lapel with the same care he'd done every year on this day, and then he stood still again. The silence in the store was heavy now, not awkward, not empty, it was full of something that couldn't quite be named. Harold turned. Now he looked at Chad. The boy stood frozen, his phone down by his side, his mouth barely open, like a response was forming, but couldn't find its way out. Harold's voice remained steady. You know what this is, Chad? Chad swallowed. I thought it was a fake. I didn't think you didn't know, Harold corrected, but you thought it was funny anyway. He gestured to the pin. That medal is only given to those wounded in combat, not injured, wounded, shot, shrapnel, burned men and women who bled for this country. He took a breath, and you streamed it like it was a joke. Chad's face had gone pale. Harold didn't yell, he didn't need to. His voice dropped into a tone that made the room colder. You didn't just disrespect a man, he said, you disrespected a nation, a brotherhood, every soldier who's ever closed their eyes and hoped to wake up again. Chad finally said something, but it was little more than a whisper. I didn't mean to, I thought it was like just a pin. Harold looked at him, eyes sharp and tired. That's the problem, he said. You didn't think enough. Then he turned to the room, to the bystanders, the customers, the silent witnesses. He let his eyes meet Kyle's for just a second, and Kyle felt something shift inside him. Everyone wants to talk about respect, Harold said. We print it on the walls, we put it in company policies, but respect isn't just for customers or supervisors or dress codes. He motioned toward James Monroe. That is what we respect: quiet sacrifice, earned dignity, a man who bled, who carried brothers out of fire zones, who didn't ask to be saluted, but sure as hell should never be mocked. Silence, it stretched. Even the cash register light seemed to dim a little. Harold stepped back, then he turned to James one more time. Sir, he said again, the formality returning like a suit being buttoned. On behalf of this store, this company, and the country that still owes you more than it can repay, I apologize. James Monroe nodded once, no flourish, just grace. Harold faced Chad. You're suspended, effective immediately. Wait in the office. Chad didn't argue. He walked slow, heavy, smaller than he had ever been before, and then he was gone. The old man stood for another moment, scanning the space. Then gently, he pulled the brim of his cap down just slightly and turned to walk out, his steps even, his head high. No one stopped him. No one could have. Kyle remained frozen by the shoe rack, heart hammering in his chest, unsure what he had just witnessed except that it felt important, like something that would stick to his memory in the years to come. Could this moment redefine their values? And across the room, customers still stood still. A woman wiped her eye. A young man lowered his phone. A child, no more than 8, asked his mom in a whisper, what was that medal for? She didn't answer right away. Kyle would remember that, too. As the doors closed behind James Monroe and the sunlight spilled into the checkout lane, something else remained in the air, a shift, a realization that you never really know who you're talking to, that not every medal is meant for display, but everyone deserves respect, and that sometimes the quietest men in the room are the ones carrying the heaviest truths. For a long time, after the doors closed behind Mr. Monroe, no one moved. It wasn't because they didn't know how, it was because something in the air told them they shouldn't. Not yet. Sometimes silence has to stretch before it makes room for the right kind of understanding. Chad Delaney sat alone in the back office, his hands fidgeting with the hem of his sleeve. His phone was face down on the desk. Notifications still buzzed every now and then, but he didn't look. He couldn't, not after what had just unfolded on the sales floor, not after seeing the way everyone had stopped watching him like he'd done something far worse than make a bad joke, because deep down he knew he hadn't just mocked an old man, he'd mocked something sacred, and worse, he hadn't known it was sacred until it was too late. The door opened. Harold Strickland stepped in and closed it quietly behind him. He didn't sit, he didn't pace, he just stood across from Chad, arms crossed, eyes level. You understand what happened out there? He asked. Chad's voice barely came out. Yeah, do you, Chad? Nodded slowly. I thought it was fake. I didn't know. Harold didn't soften. That's the problem, son, you didn't know, but you acted like you did, and then you doubled down in front of a camera. Chad looked down at the floor. I wasn't trying to. You weren't trying to honor him, Harold interrupted. That much is clear. Silence again, this one tighter, more personal. Harold exhaled, his shoulders lowering slightly. Look, I wasn't much older than you when I lost a friend in Kandahar. He took her round to the chest while pulling a wounded corporal off the road. They gave his Purple Heart to his mom 2 weeks later. I watched her hold it like it weighed more than the coffin. He let the words settle. You think that's funny? No, sir? Chad whispered. Harold nodded once. Good. Then he pulled out a small notepad from his coat pocket and wrote something on the top sheet. You're suspended, effective immediately, 1 week. No pay. Chad flinched, but didn't argue. Harold tore the page and set it on the desk. While you're off, he continued, I want you to do something. Chad looked up. You're going to complete a course on military history and honor, American conflict and the cost of freedom. Every store in this region will go through it, but you'll be the first. Chad nodded slowly. Harold paused. And you're going to write a letter to him, Mr. Monroe? Harold nodded. Yes and no. I'm not going to send it. That's between you and your conscience. But you're going to write it anyway. Ched sat back. Yes, sir, and that was the end of it for now. In the days that followed, the store changed, not in the way most people might expect. No banner, no speech, no PR stunt. Just a small sign placed near the entrance in simple typeface framed in dark wood. If you have served in the United States Armed Forces, please allow us the honor of thanking you. Below it, a small American flag pin rested in a glass dish. Customers who paused to read it usually walked a little slower, a few nodded, some placed their hand gently over their heart as they passed, and for the first time in a long while, Kyle Brooks noticed something that had always been there, but never acknowledged. Veterans, they'd been coming in for years, slipping quietly between aisles. Buying shoes, trying to keep the weight off aging knees, tired backs, worn hips. Most never said a word about where they'd been or what they'd seen, but now they paused and they saw the sign and they nodded, not in approval exactly, but in recognition. Something had shifted. Could this sign honor a legacy? The old man never came back, but his presence never really left. On a Thursday morning 2 weeks later, Kyle found a folded piece of paper tucked inside a box of restocked inventory. It wasn't addressed to anyone, it wasn't signed. But Kyle knew. He read the note twice before folding it gently and slipping it into his pocket. To the man I mocked, I didn't know the weight of what you carried until I saw the way others stood still around you. I wore your medal like a joke, but you wore it like a memory. I didn't deserve your silence, but I'll carry what it meant quietly from now on. That afternoon, Harold called a short meeting. The staff gathered near the break room, unsure what to expect. He stood at the front holding nothing but a clipboard. No lectures, he said, just a story, and he told it, not the whole thing. Not every detail, but enough to remind them that the smallest acts of mockery can pierce deeper than they know, and that the quietest man in the room might be the one who's earned the most. The story eventually made its way beyond the store, not through headlines, not through a viral video, but through people, word of mouth, veteran groups, a barbershop, a town over. A VFW hall where someone said, "Did you hear what happened at that Foot Locker in Pine Brook?" They told it quietly, respectfully, and always with the same ending. He didn't say a word. But he didn't have to. Back in the store, Kyle kept watching, kept learning. He started noticing the way older men walked, how they scanned the room without turning their heads, how they touched their belt loops when they were uncomfortable, how they always kept their backs to the wall when possible. He didn't ask questions, but he offered help faster. He stood straighter. He started saying sir more often, and meaning it. And on one afternoon near closing, a man in his 70s came in looking for orthopedic soles. He wore no medal, no cap, just moved slow and spoke soft. Kyle helped him without a word about his past, but as the man turned to leave, he paused, hand resting on the counter. You work here long? He asked. Kyle nodded. A little over a year. The man smiled. You carry yourself different than most. Just wanted to say that. Kyle offered a quiet smile. Thank you, sir. The man nodded and left. And that night, Kyle pulled out the folded letter again, the one he never showed anyone. He read it not to judge, not to repeat, just to remember, because some stories aren't told to change the world, they're told to change you, and this one, it did. He never saw James Monroe again, never knew where he lived, whether he'd heard the apology, whether he even cared, but he remembered the way the old man had stood still, the way he had reattached his medal without anger, the way he had turned and walked out, leaving behind a silence that somehow taught more than 1,000 words ever could. And long after the incident faded from daily talk, after Chad returned, quieter, more deliberate, never once reaching for his phone at the counter again, after the training module went live across every store in the district under the banner, respect earned, respect given, Kyle still thought about that Saturday afternoon, still pictured the torn jacket, the quiet nod, the weight of a single pin, still heard Harold's words, that medal is not a punchline, and still carried his own silent bow, that next time a man like that walked in, he wouldn't just notice, he'd stand still. Could this lesson inspire lasting change? In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition. Some just need to know that today someone isn't going hungry, and sometimes that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Graceful Valor Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.